morning, everybody. My name is Dennis Graban, and I am here from the Wake County Extension Master Gardener Program. I'm going to talk to you about a primer on lawns. We have a lot of information to talk about, and this is going to be kind of a brief overview to get you started in the kinds of things you need to be thinking about regarding your lawns. Everything I'm going to be talking about today is going to come from this little publication. This is my personal copy, but if anybody wants to take a photocopy of this or remember or make a note, Carolina Lawns. So on the information package, a little sheet that you picked up, there's a website for the Master Garden Extension Office. If you go on that and search for Carolina Lawns, you will find this document, this publication available to you that you can download or PDF. Okay? I need to print a hard copy if you have hard copy, you can do that. But I would recommend that you do that because there's a lot of information in here, and we're going to have to go through this really pretty quickly, and it's hard to retain all of that. Okay? So, with that said, let me go on and start a presentation. So we're going to be talking about lawns, obviously. People like to put lawns in because they're pretty. You have places to play with your children or your pets. Increases the values of your homes for obvious reasons. And there are a number of environmental benefits too. One of the biggest problems we have in urban areas, are most of you who are here urban? Okay, not too many people from the rural. Okay, so if you're outside in the rural area, you've got plenty of green spaces. But if you're living in historic Oakwood or any of the subdivisions we might have around town here, especially if you're right downtown, you have a problem with hardscape everywhere. And there's just not that much green spaces available to provide for proper environmental conditions. So your lawn will help reduce runoff. It helps filter the water. Because it's green, it's growing, it produces oxygen. It reduces the surface temperature all around your house. There are a number of environmental benefits. But not in this slide, and one caveat that I want to point out, if you notice this home here, this is a beautiful home. It's an older home, I'm guessing, because of the chimneys here. But you see they've got a bunch of hardscaping. That's not going to help the conditions we're talking about, but they also have a good amount of plantings all around the house where they've got woody ornamentals and other sorts of plantings. The downside to planting a lawn is the fact that essentially you've got a green desert, if you think about it. Because what you want in your lawn, you want the turf grass. Right? How many dandelions do you want in your lawn? How much henbit do you want in your lawn? You don't want any of that. That's a pest. Anything else growing there is something that you don't want. So you wind up with basically monocropping. And there are some issues around that I'm sure you're all familiar with. So just keep that in mind, that I advocate for the smallest lawn possible, that you keep looking very nice so that you have some biodiversity that you introduce into your property. And that also is very aesthetically pleasing as well. Okay. All right. So one of the first problems you're going to run into is, well, what kind of grass should I plant? All right? Because there are two different kinds of grasses you're going to plant here. It's going to be warm weather grass or cool weather grass. And these are all examples of warm weather grasses. All right? Part of your decision level is going to be, from a personal preference point of view, what do I want my lawn to look like during what time of year? So if you're a warm season grass kind of person, if you've got the zoysia grass, the centipede, those sorts of grasses, Bermuda grass, your grass right now is going to be brown. Right? If you've got the cold season grasses, the ryegrasses, the tall fescue, the fine fescue, it's going to be green right now. So this time of year, and actually starting from about October, November, into that period of time, the cool season grasses are very green, very lush, look very, very pretty. But when it gets hot and they get stressed, they go dormant. In July and August, they turn brown. All right? Exact opposite for the warm season grasses. Now they're brown. July and August, they're going to be nice and green. So that's one consideration. Another consideration is the fact that warm season grasses are spreading grasses. They send out rhizomes, they send out stolons, so they spread. And so if you have an area where you want to put some turf grass, or you've got an area that's died out, the grasses will normally just fill in those spots. Not so with the cool season grass. You have to seed that every time because it's a clumping grass. So it requires a little bit more maintenance. And in terms of maintenance, the warm season grasses take less water, they take less mowing, they take less of everything. okay? But they're going to be brown for a good portion of the year. And that's all personal preferences, that's up to you. Now, we have 3 different environmental zones here in the state of North Carolina, but we're going to focus in exclusively here on the Piedmont because that's where we are. And the soil here in the Piedmont area is mostly clay-based. If you're in the coastal plain area, then you could have a lot of sand, all right? But that's not our issue. So the temperatures that we have here will determine mowing, planting, fertilizing practices, and all those sorts of things, all of which are different depending upon the kind of grass that you have. All right. All right, so you got the cold season grass and you got the warm season grasses. So again, as I mentioned earlier, the cold season grasses, this is their time of year in the spring and the fall. The different kinds of grasses, cool season grasses you have are the tall fescues, Kentucky bluegrass, the fine fescue, ryegrass. And when they mention ryegrass, you're talking about perennial ryegrass, not annual ryegrass. Although annual ryegrass is a cool season grass, it's just that when you plant annual ryegrass, this moment it warms up, it dies. All right. So a lot of folks will use that for erosion prevention. If you have some landscaping or construction going on at this time of year, you might want to put some annual ryegrass on just to keep the mud from sliding out into the street and making a mess. And then the moment it warms up, it dies out. All right. So, as I mentioned, the warm season grasses, they go dormant as soon as it gets cold. As soon as you have your first frost, they turn brown. And the 4 most common warm season grasses are going to be your Bermuda, your zoysia, your St. Augustine, and centipede. Interesting thing about St. Augustine grass is about the only turf grass that's actually native to North Carolina. Kind of interesting trivia there. And it does best really in the coastal plains. If you ever go to Florida, you'll see St. Augustine grass all over the place because Florida is basically one big sandbar. So it does well there. All right. All right, so we'll start off with you want to establish a lawn. So you have a new place, or your lawn is such a mess it's just a bundle of weeds, or it's in such disrepair that you just want to wipe it out and start all over again. Okay, and in some cases that's the best thing you could do. If it gets to be too deteriorated, then it's kind of hard to try to regenerate the grass that's there. It's just easier to wipe it all out and start all over again. All right. So if that's the case, we're going to be talking later about grass that's not quite that bad. You just want to rejuvenate it. All right. So first thing again, you decide warm weather, cold weather, because depending upon what kind of grass you're going to install, you're going to have different timelines. And this is going to be true for everything. When you plant it, when you fertilize it, when you apply herbicides to it to control weeds, it's all dependent upon the kind of grass that you have. All right. So you're going to start off with obviously removing all the debris that you have hanging around the lawn, and you're going to kill the existing vegetation. All right. Now, there's a variety of ways you could do that. The Extension Office is quite comfortable with using glyphosate. All the information that we have is information that says that's a safe product to use, but some people choose not to use that, and that's fine. But if you have tall fescue grass or any of the cool season grasses, it's fairly easy to kill. Basically, you just till it under, and that'll kill it. Now, if you've got centipede grass, or if you've got Bermuda grass, I don't know how the heck you kill that stuff. That's like the kudzu of grass. It is. The advantage to it is it's kind of maintenance free. You know, it sort of does its own thing for the most part. The downside to it is if you got it and you want to get rid of it, boy, that's a problem. It really is. And because it's invasive, it invades everything. So if it's in your vegetable garden, if it's in your landscaping, the rhizomes on that Bermuda grass go 12 to 18 inches down in the soil. So, you know, you dig a couple of spades, when you dig another spade, and you'll find some more rhizomes down there. It's crazy, that stuff. So if you have that, you might decide, well, I'm just going to stick with the centipede or the Bermuda grass because trying to get rid of it is so hard to do. Another point worth mentioning is if you're going to install that kind of lawn, you might want to make sure that it's not going to invade into your neighbor's property that has the cool season grasses, because that might create some issue with your neighbors when they want to have the green grass this time of year. So they've got tall fescue, and now your grass is all invading over their property, because it'll take it over and kill it until it runs across some sort of permanent barrier, like a sidewalk or a driveway or something like that. You know, an 8-foot wide driveway will stop it. Okay. All right. So then you want to grade out the area, get it nice and smooth, for obvious reasons. You want to have some kind of a tiller, and I wouldn't recommend using the tiller that I show here unless you are particularly ambitious. Yeah, either have a tiller or rent a rototiller. Those are readily available. You're going to want to make sure that you water the area before you start putting down the cedar sod to get the soil moist but not soaking wet. All right. Then you're going to want to take a soil sample. Now, I brought with me soil sample test kits. So is anybody here familiar with these? Is anybody? Okay, so some of you have done these before. Okay. So this is available to you free of charge in another month, from April through November.
No, coming back later.
Okay. You can get your soil samples tested for free, but from November 1st to March 31st, there's a $4 fee. All right? If you have a horrible lawn, if it's just terrible, one of the reasons could be that you've got poor soil conditions. The pH might be off. Your nutritional values in the soil could be, way off as well. Whoever had the property before could have grossly over-fertilized and put so much fertilizer down that it actually becomes toxic. So you want to know what your soil is before you start spending a bunch of time and money to install a new lawn without first correcting any problems there are in the dirt. All right, so you'll get a soil sample, this comes with a set of instructions. It's going to tell you exactly how to fill the boxes out, and how to fill the boxes with soil, and how to put all the demographic information and how you code it. So on the back side of this form, there are two pieces of paper here. One is a form and one's a set of instructions that tells you what to do. But on the back side of the form, you're going to put a code on this box, on this form rather, to indicate what kind of crop you have. All right, and so for lawns, there's two to choose from. One's entitled, where is this? Lawn centipede and lawn not centipede. Okay, so the code is 22 or 26. And you'll fill that out in this form. And that's very important information, because when they test the soil, they're going to give you a report back specific to the kinds of things you want to grow. So if you're going to be saying, I want to grow rhododendrons, or I want to grow dahlias, or whatever the case may be, they're going to give you different recommendations as to what you need to amend that soil for the purposes that you're interested in, the crop that you want to grow there. Okay? So I have some here. If anyone's interested, I'm happy to give you a couple of boxes and the instructions. I would highly recommend that before you go any further with establishing a lawn, or even when it comes to renovating the lawn, that you get a soil sample. As a matter of fact, if you get a beautiful lawn, you want to keep it that way, every 3 or 4 years you should get a soil sample, because it's going to change through time. And again, if you get it during that time window I told you about, from April until November 1st, you'll get it for free. Okay. All right. So, when you, that's an old one, yeah. That's really kind of hard to read. No, that's different. That's different from what I reviewed just yesterday. All right, this is not a real good sample. So, all right, then we'll talk about the talking points. What you're going to get on the report, and make one other comment. When you fill the boxes out, make sure all the information is complete and legible, so that when the people get it, they could actually read what you have there. Because if they can't read the codes that you put on it or what your email address is, for instance, there's going to be no way for them to get the report back to you. All right. So the two things that you're going to get that are going to be most important on that report are going to be the soil pH and then the nutritional requirements. All right? So if you get a soil pH, they're going to tell you for grass, you want a pH between like 6.2 and 6.6, something like that. All right? So if your pH is 5.6, 5.7, it's too acidic, then that's going to be your problem in the first place. It's so acidic that no matter what you do, it's going to kill the grass. And that's why you want to know that. Okay? In addition to that, they're going to tell you, all right, if that's the soil condition you have, then you need to apply lime, and you need to put, given your soil condition and where you want it to go, this is how much lime you need to apply per 1,000 square feet. So you just don't go out and put lime down, you have to put the right amount of lime down. And make sure, by the way, if you're going to do that, that you put granular lime. Lime comes in a powdered form or a granular form. You put the powdered form in a spreader and yeah, it's just a mess. So go with the granular form of lime. Then they'll also give you a report that tells you what your potassium and what your phosphorus content are. They won't report to you the sodium, the nitrogen levels, okay? Now, on the report, same thing. If your soil is deficient in either one of those constituents, if it's deficient in phosphorus or potassium, your nitrogen is basically for vegetative growth, to get the grass to grow and have nice green color and to grow well. These are more for the roots and for establishing a good, healthy lawn that's going to be resistant to diseases and stresses like drought and those sorts of things. But they'll report these two numbers to you, telling you exactly how much of that you have in your soil. And again, if it's too low, they're going to tell you how much you need to put per 1,000 square feet. We have a question here.
What if your potassium level is way high? What does that mean?
Okay, well, they're going to tell you how much it's going to be there. If it's way high, that's going to tell you you don't need to add any more potassium to your soil. Now, if it gets grossly high, okay, that could be a problem. Any one of these things, if you put them down where they're 100 times what they should be, it could be toxic. All right? Now, that rarely happens, but there are times when people who aren't very much accustomed to gardening, they look at a plant, they look at the lawn, and say, it doesn't look good, what do I need to do? I don't know, put some fertilizer on it, that'll do it. And you could do a lot of damage by over-fertilizing any plant. So, take a look at that, and if you already have way in excess of what you need, then don't put any more. And I don't recall the exact toxic levels, but they're way the heck up there.
Well, and potassium is eventually going to leach out.
It will.
Phosphorus, it's there forever.
Right. Now, see again, if you've got clay soil, the clay will retain a lot of that. Clay will retain moisture and it will retain these nutrient levels as well. You got sand, it just leaches right through. Right. Okay. Now, when the nutrient requirements for nitrogen is a general rule of thumb, what they tell you is to put down 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. That's just the general recommendation. And they don't report that because nitrogen is very lame out. You put it down and measure it 2 or 3 weeks later, it's going to be completely different. Whereas these constituents tend to be pretty stable through time. They change over months for years. All right. So, if you're establishing a new lawn, you want to apply fertilizer after you've tested it. You know exactly what you need to do. You want to apply your lime and your fertilizer before you plant. All right? And once it gets growing, in another slide from now, we're going to be talking about fertilizing it after you plant. All right. So, I can't stress this enough. Once you get the test, make sure you follow those recommendations. Don't do more damage to your lawn than what's absolutely necessary. If you follow the directions, you'll be much better off. All right, now, so a little bit of math here. So, and this will apply to almost any, this math I'm going to go over with you pretty quickly, will apply to any of the constituents. So it tells you, put 1 pound of nitrogen per 1,000 square feet. Okay, you've got 2,398 square feet, so how much do you put down? Okay? Well, you got to do a little bit of math. First off, you got to measure your lawn to figure out how many square feet you have. Do you have 2,000, 4,000, 5,000, whatever square feet you have. And then the next thing is going to be, well, what fertilizer do you have? Are you all familiar with fertilizer? When you buy any kind of granular fertilizer, there's always a number on it, 3 numbers on it. You're all familiar with that? So the first number is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, right? In that order. So when we're talking about you want to add nitrogen, you're going to take this first number, and those are percentages. What those numbers means is 16% nitrogen, 4% potassium, 8% phosphorus. All right? So since we're looking at here nitrogen, how many pounds of that particular bag of fertilizer do you need to apply to your yard per 1,000 square feet? All right. So what you do is to do the math, since it's a ratio of a percentage, you're going to take 100 divided by 16, you get 6.25. So what you would need is 6.25 pounds per 1,000 square feet of a fertilizer with that formulation. And so again, if you had 2,000 square feet, you're going to need to have 12.5 pounds that you're going to spread all over. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Now, the recommendations in that pamphlet I told you about recommend you go between 1/2 pound and 1 pound. So what are you going to do if you need to have 1/2 pound? Well, there's 2 different ways you could do the math. You could stick with the formula that I already given you. You would take 100 divided by the amount of percentage of nitrogen that's in there, and that's going to give you the pounds you need for 1 pound of nitrogen. Or if you only need 1/2 pound, you just divide that number by 2. Okay. Or instead, if it's easier for you, just take the amount that you want, divide it by 50 by that amount, which is half the amount. Okay. So in this case, if this was where the formulation you have, you would divide 50 by 5 and you get 10, which is 10 pounds. All right? Okay. Or again, if you did it the way I told you about, you divide 100 by 5, you get 20, and divide that in 2, it's then 10 pounds. All right. So it's just a little basic ratio math that you have to do to figure out how much you need of that particular fertilizer for whatever lawn that you have. Okay. Now, afterwards, after the lawn starts to get established, you start to get some growth, then you're going to want to start fertilizing the lawn again. So when you seed the lawn, about 6 to 8 weeks after, or the time the grass gets tall enough for the first cutting, about 4 inches tall, that's the time to start fertilizing. All right? Warm weather grasses are planted vegetatively. That means they're by sod, not by seed. And you're going to basically fertilize them on about a monthly basis all through the growing season. All right. And what you want to be sure of that you do is you get a good even spread. This particular, I don't particularly care for this going back and forth pattern like this to get a spread. I go this way and then I go that way. Okay, the kind of a cross pattern. And I do not like a drop spreader. There's too many times where it just all falls out in one spot. I think a rotary spreader is much better to use. All right, so when do you plant? Depending upon what kind of grass you're gonna want. But if you're going to plant the cool season grass, you're going to plant that late summer, early fall. If you're going to plant the warm season grass, coming up now, early March through July. All right. I'm a little bit nervous about this March 1st date. I think that's pushing it just a little bit. In particular, what you want to do is look at the weather report, because I looked at it this morning. We have a number of days, the temperature's in the 20s. That's you know, I wouldn't put it down because it's expensive to buy, and that's pretty cold. You want the weather to be a little bit warmer for that. All right. So these are all general guidelines. You always have to use some common sense and figure out what conditions you have at this particular time in history, okay? Because they change. All right, so when you're going to plant the tall fescue, the cool season grass with seeding. The rest of it, the warm season grasses are going to be planted vegetatively, which basically means you're going to get sod. And because it's expensive, what you might want to do, instead of just rolling out all the sod the way they're showing here, you could do things like plugging or otherwise space planting, where you put one row of sod down, skip a row, put another row of sod down, or you plug spots throughout your lawn. And because it's a spreading grass, it'll fill in eventually if you want to be able to save some money. But then you're left with the raw soil, the areas where there isn't any grass to manage that too. All right, so irrigation, mowing, and pest control regarding caring for the new lawn. What you want to be able to do with any lawn is you want to be able to apply about 1 inch of water per week. All right, you want to. It's better that you water deeply and for a longer period of time than water frequently, the very shallow application of water, because that will encourage the roots of the plants of the sod to stay close to the surface. You want them to send their roots down deep. Mowing heights, it's difficult. I've always found it difficult to anticipate exactly what 50% is, okay? But as a general rule of thumb, what you want to do is not let the grass get too tall, because if the grass gets too tall, when you cut it, you got clumps of stuff laying all over the place. Most people have mulching mowers now. It's much better to cut the grass and broadcast the clippings everywhere and let those fall back into the soil and compost. You have to use less fertilizer that way. It's a much better economically or ecologically way of cutting your grass. But when it gets real tall, you get those clumps all over. Now you have to rake them up or deal with them. And what you don't want to do, especially during the heat, is cut the grass too low, especially for cool season grasses. Warm season grasses, especially the centipede and Bermuda grass, that stuff's so hardy. I don't know if you could, oftentimes you see they scalp it down to, I don't know, less than 1 inch, and it just keeps going. But you don't ever want to do that for the cool season grasses. And when it comes to pest control, you want to make sure that you don't start putting down fungicides and insecticides until you actually need it. It's another thing people do all the time. I've got a brown spot in my grass. It must be, I don't know, I must have some Japanese beetle larvae in there, so I'm going to treat the entire lawn, and maybe that's not their problem at all. So make sure you get a general idea as to what your problem is before you start treating. And this is another really critical thing. Anytime you're using any kind of pesticide, please do make sure you read and follow the directions. You put too much of it down, and again, you're going to do more damage than anything else. If you put too little down, it's not going to be effective. Irrigation, as I mentioned earlier, you want to have about 1 inch of rain per week. You can either get that, naturally as it rains, but when it gets too dry, you might have to apply some irrigation to it. It's not always necessary if you have the warm season grasses. One of the nice thing about the warm season grasses, they're pretty drought resistant. They don't take a whole lot of water. The cool season grasses take more water. Now, how often are you going to irrigate? Here, let me go to this place. So, if you have an irrigation system where we're just going to put your hose out with a sprinkler on it, how long do you need to let the garden hose or the sprinkler system run to get the amount of water you need? Well, what you need to do is get a rain gauge. I have an irrigation system with 6 different zones, so I bought 4 rain gauges, and I put them strategically located throughout wherever the one zone is. I turn on my irrigation system and I let it run for a half hour. All right? Then I measure, I take an average of all 4 of the rain gauges and say, okay, it ran for a half hour, I got 1/3 of an inch of water on this spot from this zone. Let's see, I got 1/3 for a half hour and I want to do it, I want 1 inch. I can let it run 3 times a week in that zone. In another zone, you might get a different number. All right? But that's how you measure how much water you want to deliver. All right. And if you do have an irrigation system, make sure you have a rain sensor. They're fairly inexpensive. And if you don't have, almost anyone installs them now automatically puts a rain sensor in, but what the rain sensor will do is if you set your irrigation system up on a timer, but if your irrigation system is scheduled to run tomorrow at 6 o'clock in the morning and it rains all day today, you don't want to turn on your irrigation system because your water is expensive. So make sure you get a rain gauge. Yes?
Did I understand you to say if you wanted to get an inch, you would run your system for a third of an inch 3 times a week,
Right?
rather than run it, say, twice a week for half an inch or once a week?
That's right. That was just an illustrative example. Okay?
But is it better to run it more frequently?
That depends upon how dry and hot it is. I would never run it more than 3 times a week because you do want to make sure, the most important thing is when you want to get enough water on the grass so it soaks down. And so you want to have at least a third. If you only put 1/10 of an inch down, that's not going to be effective. So yes, if the best thing to do is put down 1 inch once a week. Okay, that's the best thing to do. But come when it gets really hot and the grass, let's go back here. The grass starts to look like that. It's starting to show signs it's getting stressed. It just can't quite go for that week. It's just not working out. Then you might want to start watering more frequently. And again, this is the kind of thing you get more often on the cool weather grass than on the warm weather grass. Okay? All right. Important thing here is you want to be able to water your grass first thing in the morning. Just before sunrise is a good time to do that because what you want to do is get the water on the grass and then you want the grass blades to dry during the day. If you water at night, then the grass blades get wet and they stay wet for hours and that just promotes fungal growth. Right? So mowing, what I had recommended earlier was you want to mow at a height. The pamphlet I told you about will tell you about what proximate heights the road to mow different kinds of grass with. General rule of thumb, you can mow the warm weather grasses lower, cool season grasses taller. So 4 inches, 3.5 to 4 inches for tall fescue, 2.5 to 3 inches for the warm weather for zoysia grass, those sorts of things. But 2 things. Don't let it get too tall because it's a pain to manage it then. But more importantly, if you've got weeds in your grass, what you don't want is to go so long that those weeds go to flower and seed. Because once they do that, then you're going to reseed your entire lawn with more weeds. And those weed seeds tend to be very robust. Crabgrass seeds will survive in the soil for 30 years. Okay, so you don't want that going to seed. That just makes your problem impossible to try to resolve then. Okay. By the same token, you don't want to cut it too low because that will scalp the grass, will scald the roots and kill the grass as well. But another thing worth considering is making sure you keep the blades on your mower balanced and sharp. You could go to any of the big box stores and buy a kit to balance your blade and to sharpen them. If you have a nice sharp blade, when you cut the grass, pull any one given blade out of grass and take a look at it, and you can see where it's cut. It's going to be a nice clean cut like you cut it with a knife. When your blade gets good and dull, when you take a look at that edge, you'll see it looks like somebody ripped it off. Because that's basically, instead of cutting it, you're ripping it off. And that the more surface area you have torn like that, the greater the probability of some infectious agent getting into your grass. All right. So just keep your blade nice and sharp. We already talked about cutting heights. Talked about leaving the grass clippings on the grass to provide for some decomposition of those materials. And we talked about this. Here's the point I was trying to make. Avoid seeds from your weeds at all times. The little phrase we use, allow no weed to go to seed. Okay? All right. All right. So we talked already about the soil tests. One point here but I want to make, this is the boxes. So when you collect your soil samples, you want to dig down about 3 or 4 inches. And what you're going to want to do is you want to take representative samples. Don't go into your front lawn that might be 20 by 30 and take one spot. Take maybe half dozen spots, and they'll tell you that in those directions. And get a little bit of soil from each one of those spots, put it in a bucket, mix it all together so you get a sampling of that area, and then put that into the box. Okay? Fertilizing is very important. A lot of people could do a lot of damage when you fertilize at the wrong time. So, for instance, if you've got cool season grass, tall fescue, right about now is the end of the time that you can fertilize it safely. As a matter of fact, you're a little bit past the time. The recommendation is right around Valentine's Day. But if you have that kind of grass, and if you have not fertilized it at all during this last winter, you could put an application of fertilizer down now. But I'd suggest you do that within the next week. You're running out of time. Okay? And you never want to put fertilizer down for tall fescue in a month or 2 from now. Because what you don't want to do is encourage a lot of vegetative growth when the weather starts to get too warm. Right? And it's the exact opposite when you're doing warm season grasses. So we're just ending the time that you're going to be fertilizing cool season grasses and just beginning the time that you're going to be fertilizing the warm season grasses. And the other point that I made earlier is you fertilize both these kinds of grasses through a repetitive cycle. So for cold weather grasses, you put the first application down in October, then the second application in December, and the third application in February. And then the cold, warm season grasses, again, you're going to put that down through the growing season about once every 4 weeks or so, once a month. Somebody had a question?
Yes. I oversowed fescue last fall.
Uh-huh.
And was thinking I was going to start fertilizing, February or so this year. Well, it's been so warm, my broadleaf weeds have gone berserk.
Yes, okay.
Really taken over it.
Yeah, all right. Well, I'm running out of time here, trying to talk as fast as I can. Weed control. Let's get to that part, because it's already 10:44, and I want to leave a little bit more time for Q&A. All right, so weed control, big deal. So there's 2 different kinds of weed control, and again, you're going to be doing that at different times of the year for different kinds of weeds. So just like there's warm season grass, cold season grass, there's warm season weeds, and there's cold season weeds. All right? So what you got growing right now, your broadleaf weeds, well, that's a cool season grass weeds. So your henbit, poa annua, annual bluegrass, that kind of stuff. You have some grass in your tall fescue that looks just like tall fescue, except it's got a bunch of seeds on it. That's not tall fescue. That's poa annua. And that stuff is really hard to kill. So you have 2 different seasons, and then you have 2 different kinds of weeds. You've got monocots, you've got dicots. So broadleaf weeds, which are the dicots, and grassy weeds, which are the monocots. And they require different kinds of formulation. So it gets kind of tricky. So right now, there are 2 different kinds of applications, pre-emergent, and post-emergent. So if you have any weeds in your lawn right now, whether it's warm or cold season, it doesn't make any difference. Now's a good time to put down post-emergent herbicides to kill the weeds that are already there. Now, as a general rule of thumb, you want to put down the post-emergent herbicides as early as possible when the weeds are little. Because once the weeds get big and established and got nice deep root systems and they're robust and healthy, boy, they are pretty tough to kill. All right? And some of them, like dandelion, I don't know what the heck's going on with dandelion. You can take a dandelion, spray it with Roundup, and it has one little flower bud on it, just nascent. It's not even coming out yet. You come back 24 hours later, it's gone to seed, like in 24 hours. It says, we're dying, do something, go to seed, right? So they're very robust. You want to put your post-emergent herbicide down as soon as possible when the weeds are small. Your pre-emergent, what that means, pre-emergent means you're going to kill the weeds before they emerge through the soil, before they sprout. And what you do is you put a layer a barrier layer on the top of your soil, that when the seed under the soil starts to germinate and starts to come up to the top of the soil, it hits that barrier and kills it right then and there. All right? Now's the time for your cold weather grass to start putting your first application of your pre-emergent fertilizer, herbicide down. And make sure that when you get your herbicide, you find one that has both broadleaf and leafy grassy weeds as well. Some of them will only inhibit the broadleafs, and some of them will inhibit the grassy weeds as well. The most common grassy weed we have here in the summer, a warm weather weed, is crabgrass. And crabgrass is another one. You want to kill that as soon as you see it, because once it gets established, again, it's really hard to control. So you're going to put the pre-emergent down right now. Now's the time to do it. And then again, another 6 to 8 weeks. All right? Likewise.
And again in
6 to 8 weeks, yeah. You put it down now, and again 6 to 8 weeks from now. All right? And then for the, that's going to be for the warm season that's coming up. For the cold season, you're going to do the same kind of thing in the fall. Now, there's no post-emergent that will control that POA annual, and that's a real problem for people who have fescue grass. If you get it in your zoysia grass, it's pretty obvious. You got this green grass that's growing there, that you know it's not supposed to be there. If it's in your zoysia, tall fescue grass, it kind of blends right in. It's kind of hard to tell one from the other. And the only way you could control that was with a pre-emergent. You kill it before the seeds come up. But what you do when you have tall fescue grass is you reseed in the fall. So if you reseed in the fall and then put down pre-emergent in the fall, then your seeds aren't going to grow. So it's a problem. All right. All right. You know, we are pretty much out of time, so I just want to stop here for a moment and talk about integrated pest management. In essence, what you want to be able to do is establish a good, healthy lawn by having the proper soil testing, using the proper, based upon the soil testing, the proper amount of fertilizer, the proper amount of watering. You want to get the right grass for the right place. You want to make sure that you apply your, when you've got a good, solid, healthy growth of grass, then you're not going to need very much herbicides and pesticides. You want to keep your chemical application down as low as possible, encourage good vegetative growth of your lawn. All right, so there are a number of practices that you could do without just going out there and spraying chemicals all over the place. So think about that. Integrated means you're looking at the kind of grass and all the things we're talking about to suppress the pests, not just chemical sprays. All right, I'm going to end it at that because we are pretty much out of time, except for here. This last slide is one that gives you some more information about the kinds of material that you can find available on our website. Or another thing you could do, if you go to your search engine, and if you got any questions at all about lawns or your vegetable garden or anything else, you go to your search engine, go to Google, and type in whatever your question is. When do I apply pre-emergent for cool season grass? All right? Then following that, key in site:/edu. Site:/edu. That's going to take you to a website from a university somewhere. And typically when you do that, you're going to get things that are often hit on, that come up more frequently. They're going to be local things. So you're going to get stuff from NC State, you're going to get stuff from Clemson and other local places. But do pay attention to that. You can put in site:/edu space NC, North Carolina, to kind of limit it. But just be sure that if you get a reference and it's from someplace far away, if it's from, you know, in the Northeast somewhere or out west, that's not going to be applicable to our conditions here. But once you do that, you'll find you're going to get access to so much information it'll take you the rest of your lifetime to read through it. It's all available there to you at your fingertips. Okay, so that leaves us about 9 minutes for Q&A. And so, back there, first question.
Can you talk about the pros and cons of using a weed service that comes out with different intervals? Because my concern is around the timing. I appreciate the waves,
Yes.
I don't have to do it, I don't have to store all this stuff.
Yeah.
But the timing of it is not always in the best interest of my yard.
Yes, yes. Yeah, and that's a good question. That's another, it's a dilemma, I guess, that you have to face when you're doing almost any kind of things that you want to grow. Do I do it myself, or I hire someone to do it? What I recommend, if you hire someone to do it, spend a little bit of time researching to make sure that the people you hire actually know what they're doing, okay? Because so many people, they just show up and they have like this standard template that they apply one thing all the time, boom, that's it, okay? And that might not be the best for your lawn, and you're paying a lot of money for that, okay? So at least do some research and find out what their credentials are. The other thing is, so that's for someone who's going to be spraying the chemicals. But you always have someone who comes and cuts the grass too, the mow and blow kind of people. That's what we call them, mow and blow people. They go from one lawn to another, and they just cut the grass, they blow the lawn, and they jump in the truck, and off they go. They cut the grass, mow the lawn, dump in the truck, and away they go. One of the problems with that is you have a lot of carryover from one lawn to the next. So if you're, the last stop they were at, the lawn is full of weed seeds and all kinds of problems, and they bring their equipment from that lawn into your lawn, and your lawn is pristine, they're going to just inoculate your lawn with whatever came from the place before. A good service will clean their equipment from one lawn to the next. You might want to ask questions about that. Okay? All right. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to mention that you can drop off the soil samples
Yes.
at the lab, which is right around the corner from here.
Yeah, that's right. So there's at least two things you can do with the soil samples. On Reedy Creek Road, very close to here is where the agronomics lab is. You can take them right there on Monday through Friday business hours.
You drop them off on the loading dock.
Or that's right, even when, during off hours. Or you could take them to the extension office on Carla Drive. You have that, there's an address on that little packet that we passed out.
Only when it's free.
Oh, you're right, only when it's free. That's right, because if you have to collect money, we don't collect any money.
But it's just that, if you have a lot of places on your lawn you want to check, and
Yes.
you have to mail each one in, then
Right, that can be a
adds up.
pain. And you could get these boxes and these instructions by, again, going to the extension office, or they're readily available. Do we have any here? No? They're readily available in many places, like almost all the nurseries in town. You can go in there for free. Okay?
Anywhere you see a Master Gardener booth, they'll always be there.
And that's true too, yes. So they're accessible. Right, other questions? Yes, ma'am?
It sounds now for cool weather grasses that you need to be applying both the post-emergent and pre-emergent. Pretty much. If you
Yes,
have weeds
right
in-
now,
Is
that's
that
right.
safe?
Yep, that's safe. There are two different kinds of applications. Right. So you're good to do that. Just,
In the fall, if you don't aerate and you put grass seed down, are you gonna get any?
aeration is something I skipped over quickly here. Because we have so much clay, and it varies from place to place. I've been to places where they actually have topsoil, and the soil crumbles, and it's good soil. But there are many places where that far beneath the sod is just solid clay. So if you have a lot of clay, or if you have a place that's really compacted, then you really need to aerate it at a fairly frequent basis, every other year or even third year. Or if it's really bad, you might want to aerate it once a year for a couple of years until you get your lawn established a little bit. Yeah, but aeration is very important where you have compacted soil. All right, other questions? Yes.
We've got a zoysia lawn, and when it starts to green up in, say, May, and it looks like it's going to seed. Does it reseed itself?
No.
So these little things that come up, they look like seeds, are they not?
Are you sure it's zoysia grass that's coming
Oh,
up,
yeah.
not a weed?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Zoysia seeds in the spring.
Pardon me?
As I said, zoysia will seed in the spring, but you're probably mowing it too frequently for it to mature.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. The zoysia grass has been spread not by seed. That's what.
Right.
Okay, it's going to be spread by the rhizomes.
Right.
Okay.
Well, so if you mow it and just let it sit, will those seeds germinate?
Well, they're not mature. You've already
Right.
cut them off too early, and they're falling down where it's too shaded. And you're not watering once, twice, 3 times, or 4 times a day to make it germinate.
Right.
So don't
Again,
count on it.
starting zoysia grass from seed is very difficult to do, period. If it's just doing it naturally, that's not gonna,
Okay,
it's not gonna work. Yes, question?
Is the bluegrass weed Pollyanna, is that what you were calling it?
POA, P-O-A-A-N-N-U-A.
How does that spread from mowing one yard and going?
It can, yeah, well, again, if you look at anyone who has that stuff now, they have little seeds all over the place. And they could spread from one lawn to another. It is the crabgrass of cool weather weeds. It's nasty stuff. Yes?
So, does centipede, is that rated for this?
Yes, centipede is a very similar grass to Bermuda grass. And again, you'll see that kind of grass a lot in places where, like playgrounds, soccer fields, those sorts of things, where you're going to put something down and no one's going to be taking care of it. You know, they just sort of walk away. There's no irrigation system. It's very hardy. It does well in this part of the country, but it's extremely invasive.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind. Other questions?
Yes, I kind of have one about clover. I've been hearing a lot about putting some clover in and letting it do your fertilization and
Clover is a
clover
nitrogen fixer. Okay, so it does all those sorts of things. And it's interesting, in the last fairly recent years, maybe 5-10 years, they're developing different kinds of clover, the red clover in particular, not the kind of clover that you see as a weed. It's sort of like a lawn substitute. Okay? So if you have places that are too shaded or too wet, oftentimes people will plant clover there, turf grass clover, as a substitute. And because it is a legume, it fixes nitrogen. It's just that if you plant clover in with your regular grass, and then you get other weeds and you want to apply your broadleaf post-emergent herbicide, then you're going to kill out your clover. So if you're going to plant clover as a grass substitute, because you got one spot you're just having a heck of a time growing your grass there, you can try the clover instead.
You said there was a mini?
Yeah. It's got much smaller leaves.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember, I think they call it white clover, something like that. But if you do a search for, turf lawn clover substitute, and I know it's available commercially, and I've seen people use it.
And it might be a good solution, but it's also can have some problems with.
It's like almost anything we're going to talk about, you're going to solve this problem at the cost of this issue here. Okay? It's a balancing act, opportunity cost. Yes?
So what does moss mean?
Moss means you got too much water and not enough light. Light. So if you have moss, you probably have it on the north side of your house, and depending upon what the drainage is and the slopes are, you've got water that comes up to your house and kind of keeps the soil wet there. And if you want to try to grow grass there, good luck. Grass needs light, okay? And if you've got moss growing, it's telling you that the chances of you growing grass there are pretty slim.
It looks nice.
Yeah. So, a lot of people think moss looks pretty, and actually, you've seen hardscapes with, flagstones, and they'll put moss in between because it looks nice. Okay, so what you're going to do is not try to grow grass there. You let the moss grow in, or plant things there that are shade and moisture tolerant. Okay? Other questions? Yes.
So, like a pre-emergent herbicide on Bermuda.
Okay.
Would that be like November and February, or?
Well, again, you have 2 seasons.
Right.
You have cool season weeds right now. The weeds that we're talking about are growing right now.
Okay.
And they're getting toward the end of the growing season.
Okay.
All right? So if you want to start applying pre-emergent herbicides, you're going to start doing that now for the seed. The weeds are going to be coming up in a few months from now.
Got it.
Okay. Now, come in the fall, now this wheat, that Pollyanna that we're talking about, it's going to start growing again back in October. Okay? To start establishing itself and growing where it's all over the place now. So you're gonna apply your pre-emergent for your cool weather weeds in the fall. Okay? All right, yes.
So what do you know about effective organic herbicides, fungicides, if any out there that you know are
Yeah, but that's going to like take a separate discussion. There are some things that you could do. The most important thing regarding fungicides is to keep your lawn healthy and not applying water, too much water or not enough water, or water at the wrong time. You set up your conditions of growing that don't encourage fungus to grow, okay? So that's the first thing that you're going to stop with, and that's as organic as you could possibly get. But once you actually get brown spot disease and other kinds of fungicides, there are some organic things, but that fungus is pretty tough, okay? And as far as weeds go, you could do applications where you use mixture of Graban vinegar. What are we using for post-emergent weed control? We apply right to the weed, organically.
Epsom salt, and is it Dawn?
Vinegar, Epsom salts, and what was the combination? Well, you can look that up, organic herbicides, and they work reasonably well for annual weeds, but not for perennial weeds. Yeah. All right. Any other questions before we wrap it up? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. I appreciate you being here and listening to me ramble on for a period of time.